the carriage wheel cracked against the gatepost on the way in, and Mira Ashworth heard it from the library window. Heard it, and did not look up from the estate ledger open before her, because she already knew what it meant. The Duke of Carreau had come home. She did not yet know what his homecoming would cost her. Had she known, she would have kept her pen moving all the same. She had been companion and secretary to the Dowager Duchess for 3 years, long enough to have memorized every debt entered in the estate's books and every silence maintained around them. Long enough to know that the figure now crossing the gravel below, broad-shouldered, slow-moving, with the deliberate economy of a man conserving something, was not what the county gossips had made of him. They had made him a ruin. They were not entirely wrong. But ruin, Mira had observed, was a condition with several causes, and only one of them was the man himself. She set down her pen. She turned the page. The household account for the North Wing stared back at her in a column of figures she had not been asked to audit, but had audited nonetheless, because the numbers had not added correctly for 6 months, and an incorrectly kept account is, in her considered experience, never merely an accident. It is an argument. She closed the ledger. She placed her hand flat on its cover. 3 weeks, her employer had told her that morning, taking her tea with the careful ceremony of a woman who has learned that most pleasures have expiry dates. 3 weeks until the creditors' assembly, at which point the estate and everything attached to it would be laid open for settlement. 3 weeks. Mira turned that figure over in her mind the way a jeweler turns a stone, not for its beauty, which was nil, but for its angles, which were several. His name was Edmund Ashmore, and he was the 8th Duke of Carreau, and he walked through his own front door, with his hat in his hand and the expression of a man returning to the scene of a wound he had not finished dressing. His mother rose from her chair by the fire and opened her arms. He went to her. Mira did not watch this. She had already learned that the moments worth noting in this house were the ones everyone else thought unremarkable. And this particular moment, a son come home to his mother, the inheritance gone, was remarkable enough that the whole room noticed it, which meant she could observe it later in their faces and read it there without cost. What she had already noted in the 3 seconds before she deliberately looked away was this: his hands. The knuckles were worked. The right cuff bore a stain of lampblack that no valet had managed to remove. The Duke of Carreau, who was reputed to have gambled away 2 generations of careful accumulation on a single season of bad judgment in town, had been working with his hands. She filed this away beside the ledger's incorrect column and returned to her page. He found her there an hour later. She heard his step in the corridor, heavier than his mother's, more deliberate than the footman's, and she did not look up, because looking up was a luxury she had long since stopped affording herself. The door opened. She kept writing. The step came into the room and stopped. "You are Miss Ashworth." It was not a question. His voice was low, and it did not announce itself. It simply arrived. "I am." She finished the figure she was transcribing and set the pen down. Then she looked up. He was looking at the ledger rather than at her. This told her something. A man who looks at the books before he looks at the person holding them either trusts numbers more than faces, or has reason to be afraid of what the numbers will say. She had not yet decided which applied here. "My mother tells me you have been managing the household correspondence as well as her personal accounts. For 14 months, yes. And the estate ledgers?" She let a half-second pass. "I have been reading them. I was not asked to." He looked at her then. His eyes were gray, and they were doing what she recognized as their working expression, not cold, but attending. The way a man looks at a mechanism to understand it, not to condemn it. And what did you find, reading what you were not asked to read? She considered him for a moment. The window behind his shoulder showed the park in late August light, heat pressing on the grass like a flat hand. 3 weeks, she thought. I found, she said carefully, that several of the figures in the North Wing household account have been entered twice, once correctly and once in a separate column that does not correspond to any expenditure I can locate a receipt for. The room was very quiet. A blackbird was singing somewhere outside, industrious and indifferent. How much? Over 14 months? 1,140 pounds. She watched his face, not a flicker. The stillness of a man taking a blow without letting his face report it. That is only what I can trace. I suspect the practice is older than my tenure. He was quiet for a long time. The blackbird continued its business. Miss Ashworth, he said at last, and his voice had not changed in register or pace. I will ask you to say nothing of this to anyone until I have had the opportunity to look at the records myself. That is a reasonable request. She paused. I should tell you, however, and I say this not to alarm you, but because I believe in laying accounts honestly, that whoever is responsible for those entries has access to this room and to the correspondence going out of this house. He nodded once. He picked up his hat from where he had set it on the corner of the table. He held it in both hands, and she watched his face do the thing it did, the still absorption, the refusal to give the blow more ground than it had already taken. You will keep your own counsel. I cannot compel you to. I can only ask. You have asked. I will keep it. She picked up her pen again. I would suggest, however, that you do not telegraph your intentions to whoever keeps those books. People who enter figures twice are people who have already decided that the truth belongs to them to arrange. He left without answering, but at the door he paused, barely, the pause of a man whose training told him to keep walking and whose instinct told him something else, and she noted with professional interest that he did not ask how she had come to hold such a view. He already knew it was correct, which meant he had suspected and had said nothing and had come home to a house where the very air was a kept secret. She returned to her ledger. The blackbird had not finished its song. She was to find out, over the following days, that Edmund Ashmore was a man of almost aggressively unremarkable habits. He rose early. He worked in the estate office and also in the afternoons, in the stable yard and the kitchen garden, with his sleeves turned back and no apparent concern for the contradiction between his rank and his conduct. He asked Mira for the household accounts twice, said nothing critical of her work, and returned them each time with a marginal note so precise and so correctly placed that she revised her estimate of his mathematical ability upward by several degrees. He did not explain himself. He did not, she noticed, discuss the financial situation with anyone in the house except herself, and even with her. Only in fragments, each piece offered on the clear understanding that she would hold it and not traffic in it. She liked this about him. She was not yet ready to admit that she liked it, but she noted it. His cousin, Mr. Dorian Hale, arrived on the 4th day. Dorian Hale was everything Edmund Ashmore was not in terms of surface, fair-haired where the Duke was dark, fluent where the Duke was spare, smiling with the particular ease of a man who has learned that a good smile will cross most rooms before he has to. He was the estate's trustee of record, had held the position for 4 years, and he greeted Mira with the warmth of someone who has decided in advance to approve of her. Miss Ashworth. He took her hand with the confident pressure of a man who has touched 1,000 hands and does not particularly distinguish between them. Edmund has told me you are indispensable. I find I agree already. That is kind. She withdrew her hand with the smoothness of long practice. Have you had a comfortable journey? He smiled. It was, she thought, an excellent smile, the kind that has been calibrated over years to close the space between people before they have time to measure it. Very, though I confess I find the county roads in worse repair than I remember. The estate roads were last maintained 3 years ago. The account for that maintenance is in the North Wing ledger, if you should wish to see it. Something moved behind his eyes. It was very quick, and she would not have caught it had she not been watching for exactly that frequency of movement, the slight recalibration behind a practiced face when the ground shifts unexpectedly. He laughed, easy and warm. You do have a head for figures. Edmund warned me. He is generous. She excused herself and went back to the library. She sat down. She opened the ledger to the North Wing accounts. She sat with her hand on the page and looked at the figures she had been studying for 6 weeks, and she thought about the way Dorian Hale's smile had not quite reached its apex before her mention of the maintenance account had sent it sideways by a fraction. A fraction. But she was in the business of fractions. She had a decision to make. She had a secret she was keeping at the Duke's request, and she had just acquired a new piece of information that might be the piece the whole puzzle was waiting for. And the Duke was somewhere in the kitchen garden pulling up what she assumed were parsnips, and she was a paid companion with no standing whatsoever to interfere in the affairs of a duchy under creditor's notice. These were the facts. She turned to the page at the back of the ledger, where she kept her own notes, written in the dense, contracted hand she used for things she did not intend other eyes to find, and she added a line. That evening, Edmund Ashmore came to the library doorway and looked at her for a moment without speaking. She was cataloging correspondence by date, which was tedious and necessary, and she did not look up. Hale says you mentioned the road maintenance account to him. I did. He mentioned the roads, did he? He seemed well informed about the general state of the county, which is natural for a man who has administered the estate trust for 4 years. I thought it would be discourteous not to follow his lead. There was a silence. She finished dating a letter and moved it to its pile. Then Edmund Ashmore said, very quietly, Miss Ashworth. There is something I cannot yet lay before you, a thing I have suspected for some time, which I have not been able to prove, and which, if I name without proof, will damage a man who may be innocent, and will certainly destroy what small trust remains between this house and the county at large. A pause. I am asking you, again without right to compel you, to hold what you suspect for a little longer. She looked up then. He was standing with one hand on the doorframe, the other at his side, and his face was the face she was becoming accustomed to reading. Not closed, exactly. More like a page of close print in poor light. The meaning was there. It simply required conditions she did not yet have. How long is a little longer? 3 weeks, which was the deadline, which meant whatever he was waiting for was arriving with the creditors' assembly, and she would have to work with that. All right. 3 weeks. She held up one finger. But you will tell me what I should not touch. He looked at her steadily. The correspondence to the family solicitor. Don't let it out of your sight. She nodded. He left. She looked at the pile of correspondence she had been sorting and found, near the bottom, 2 letters addressed in Dorian Hale's handwriting to the family solicitor in London, both of them dated in the past month, both of them sent without her knowledge, both of them still present only because they had been placed in the wrong pile by a housemaid who could not distinguish the outgoing from the archived. She held them. She did not open them. She put them in the locked drawer of the library desk, of which she held the only key, and she noted in her private record that the account now had 3 more entries she could not reconcile against any legitimate expenditure, and that the total since she had begun keeping count was not £1,140. It was closer to 2,000. The morning Dorian Hale brought her the offer was a Tuesday, and the weather had not broken, though it had been trying for a week, heat building in the hedgerows and the cattle standing still in the shade like furniture moved outdoors. Mira was walking back from the village, where she had gone to collect a package of household sundries and, incidentally, to speak for 10 minutes with the postmistress about the dates on which certain letters had been dispatched from the estate over the past year. The postmistress had a memory for faces and a ledger of her own. Hale fell in beside her on the lane. He was dressed with his usual immaculacy, and he matched his pace to hers with the ease of a man who is comfortable everywhere. And he talked about the harvest prospects and the state of the roads. He mentioned the roads again, she noted, and then he said, in a tone no different from the one he'd used for the harvest, "I've been thinking about your position here." She waited. "Edmund is fond of you. I am also. And I think, given the circumstances, the assembly in 3 weeks, the inevitable changes, that it would be worth your while to begin considering your options. That is thoughtful. I wonder if you have family in town, someone who might take you in while you found a new situation. I have a great aunt. She is very old and finds me useful." "Good, good." He walked a few steps in silence. The heat pressed. A yellowhammer was singing from the hedge, 3 short notes and a long one. Bright and senseless. I only raise it because I suspect there is going to be a great deal of difficulty over the estate accounts, and a woman in your position, one who has had access to the books, who has been doing work that wasn't strictly her remit, could find herself in an uncomfortable light if there are questions about the accounts. She stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before he stopped as well, and turned back to look at her, and his smile was present and gentle and as empty as a painted window. "Are you suggesting that questions about the accounts might attach to me?" "I am suggesting that it would be simpler and more comfortable for everyone if you were elsewhere when those questions were asked." The yellowhammer kept singing. The heat was a weight. She looked at Dorian Hale, at his fine coat, his careful hands, his smile that had the texture of a thing practiced until it felt natural, and she felt a very clear, very cold certainty settle into the center of her chest. "Mr. Hale, I have kept the accounts of this household for 14 months. Every figure I have entered is correct. Every receipt I have processed is filed, and the figures I have not entered, the ones that appear in a column with no corresponding receipt, are not mine." She paused. "Is there something specific you would like to know?" His smile held. "Only that I hope you'll consider the practical advantages of a quiet departure. I will consider them." And she turned and walked back toward the house. She did not hurry. She had learned, over years of being the person nobody expected to notice anything, that hurrying is information given for free. She went to the library. She unlocked the drawer. She took out the 2 letters addressed to the solicitor, and she laid them on the desk, and she looked at them for a long time. She did not open them. She had not opened them, but she had, in the past week, located 3 other letters, sent, received, and kept, that bore Dorian Hale's handwriting, and 2 of them referred to transfers of funds with dates that matched, to the penny, the entries in the North Wing account that should not exist. She was not going to leave. She put the letters in her apron pocket. She went to find the Duke. She found him in the estate office with his coat off and a survey map spread across the table, and the look of a man who has been trying to solve a problem by looking at it long enough to see the solution hidden in its surface. He looked up when she came in. She closed the door. She placed both letters on top of the survey map. He looked at them. He looked at her. Where were they? Misfiled in the outgoing correspondence. 2 weeks ago. I have been waiting. She paused. I have also been to the post office. Mrs. Enfield keeps very good dates. He picked up one letter. He did not open it. He held it in both hands, and she watched his face do the thing it did. The still absorption. The refusal to give the blow more ground than it had already taken. He offered you money to leave. Not a question. He offered me the practical advantages of a quiet departure. And you refused. I went to find you. She folded her hands. I should tell you that I have been keeping a private record. Dates, amounts, discrepancies, it is in a notebook in my room. I can produce it. He set the letter down with the gentleness of a man setting down something he might need to use as a weapon. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not gratitude, exactly. More like the look of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just, without announcement, been joined. Miss Ashworth, he said, and stopped. He looked at the letters. He looked at the survey map. He looked at the window, where the heat pressed white against the glass. There is a thing I cannot yet tell you. I am close. Another week, perhaps less. I know. She moved toward the door. Don't let him access the solicitor's file. He will try on Thursday. He mentioned Thursday twice in the past 4 days without appearing to mean to. She left. Behind her, the estate office was quiet, and she did not look back to see if he was watching her go, because looking back is also information given for free, and she was not ready to give it. The blow came on a Wednesday, 1 week before the creditors' assembly, and it came in the drawing room in front of the Dowager Duchess and 2 neighboring families who had come to call and stayed for tea, which was exactly, Mira thought afterward, the way these things are arranged. Dorian Hale produced a letter. He produced it from his breast pocket with the ease of a man who has been waiting for the right audience, and he set it on the low table beside the teapot, and he said, in the gentlest voice in the room, that he felt it his painful duty to raise a matter that touched on the household's interests. The letter was addressed to Mira, or rather, it appeared to be addressed to Mira, her name in a handwriting she had never used, above a set of figures that matched, with cruel precision, the column of false entries she had been tracing for months. The implication was clear: a correspondent, an arrangement, a skimming of the accounts. The letter bore the date of her first month in the household. It bore the name of a banking house in Bristol that she had never entered. The room was very quiet. Tea cooled in cups. The Dowager Duchess had the expression of a woman who has lived long enough to have been surprised before, and who is reserving her judgment, and who is watching her companion's face with a precision that almost matched the companion's own. Mira looked at the letter. She looked at the handwriting. She looked at Dorian Hale, who was watching her with his head tilted a degree or two, in an expression of sincere regret that had been, she was certain, rehearsed. That is not my handwriting. No, it is the handwriting of your correspondent. I have no correspondent by that name. I am sorry, Miss Ashworth. I did not want this to be necessary. Edmund Ashmore, who had been standing by the window and had not moved since the letter appeared, said nothing. He looked at Hale. Then he looked at Mira. His face was unreadable in the way that she had come to understand did not mean blankness, it meant calculation, the deep internal running of figures toward a conclusion he was not yet ready to declare. She felt the room against her. She felt the weight of it, the visiting families, the cups, the social calculus of a woman in a dependent position with no family name to call on. She felt the specific species of loneliness that is being the person nobody crosses the room for, present in a house where things are being decided about you without your testimony. She folded her hands. She looked at Dorian Hale. "I see. When was that letter sent to you?" "It came to me last month. I confess I have been wrestling with my duty ever since, and you thought the right moment to discharge that duty was in front of the Mersham family and Mrs. Pell." A small silence. His smile did not waver. "I thought the sooner this was addressed." Indeed, she rose. "I will not trouble the room further this afternoon." She looked at the Dowager Duchess, whose eyes had not left her face. "Ma'am, I will be in the library." She walked out with her back straight and her hands quiet at her sides, and the only sound in the drawing room was the resumption, a moment later, of uncertain conversation that did not know where to look. She sat in the library for an hour. The blackbird was silent. The heat had a different quality now, thicker, the kind that precedes something. She opened her notebook. She looked at her figures. She thought about the handwriting on that letter, which was fluent and slightly forward-leaning, and bore a particular way of forming the capital A that she had seen somewhere before in the past 3 weeks, and she knew before she could have said how she knew that she was going to find it in the outgoing estate correspondence, where the same hand had been writing, undisguised, for 4 years. The door opened. It was Edmund. He came in and closed the door and stood with his back to it and looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for a moment, and then she said, because she had run out of uses for silence on this particular point, he forged it. "Yes, you knew." "I suspected. I did not have the comparative sample I needed to prove it." She reached into the drawer and removed a bundle of estate letters, the ones she had been quietly pulling from the files over the past week and placing in her locked drawer, dates noted, handwriting observed, and she set them on the desk. The capital A, and the descender on the letter Y, which sits at a consistent angle of approximately 35 degrees from the baseline. You will see it in this letter, dated 3 months ago, regarding the wool contract. You will also see it in 6 others. He came to the desk. He stood beside her, and he looked at the letters, and she watched his hands, one pressed flat on the desk surface, the other holding the letter she had pointed to, and she was acutely aware, with the part of her that was not doing mathematics, of the proximity, the lampblack still just visible on the edge of his cuff, the way he breathed when he was thinking, quietly, as though breathing were a thing he had learned to do without waste. That is very nearly enough. Nearly, the banking house in Bristol will need to be queried. If the account in your name was opened with his signature as guarantor, that will close it. He looked at her. There is also, he stopped, the thing you cannot tell me. For 2 more days. He straightened. He picked up the letters. I am going to need to ask you to trust me for 2 more days, after which I will lay every card on the table, including the one I've been protecting at cost. He looked at the window. You should know that the cost has been considerable. She looked at him. She thought about what she knew and what she had inferred and what she suspected, and she assembled these things in the order most likely to be true, and what she arrived at was a picture that made her chest ache with something she was not prepared to name in a library at 4:30 in the afternoon. 2 days. 2 days. He moved to the door. At the door, he paused, and she braced for another instruction, another careful withholding. Instead, he said, without turning, the letter he produced. The one with your name on it. A pause. When I looked at your face, when you said it was not your handwriting, I want you to know that I believed you before you finished the sentence. He left. She sat with that for a moment, the way you sit with something that will bear slow consideration. Then she opened her notebook to a fresh page and began to write. The Dowager Duchess came to her room that night. She came without ceremony, in her house slippers and her old gray shawl, and she sat in the chair by Mira's window, and she said, without preamble, "I have known Dorian Hale since he was born. I have also known exactly what he is for the last 7 years. I did not say so, because I did not have proof, and because his mother was my friend, and because I am old enough to have learned that accusation without evidence is merely scandal with ambitions." Mira set down her pen. "You know, I know that my son came home with worked knuckles and lamp black on his cuff, and a face like a man who has been doing penance." The Dowager Duchess looked at her hands in her lap. "I know that he has been selling his own horses for 2 years. Quietly, by private arrangement, to keep the house from falling before he could get here and determine the truth." She paused. "He did not tell me. I have my own methods. Why are you telling me this?" The old woman looked at her. Her face was not sentimental. It was the face of a woman who has learned to love accurately. "Because tomorrow morning Dorian Hale will go to the estate office to remove something from the trust file, and my son is planning to let him, because what he removes will prove itself to be a copy and not the original. And the original is..." She stopped. "I have already said more than Edmund would wish. I am saying only this. Be in the corridor outside the estate office at 8 o'clock in the morning. Bring your notebook." She rose. She patted Mira's hand with the businesslike affection of a woman who believes in efficiency, even in tenderness. "He is, in addition, a great deal better than he looks, which is saying something, since he looks very well." She closed the door. Mira sat in the silence. The night was cooler now. Something had shifted in the air, the first suggestion that the heat might finally break. She looked at her notebook. She thought about worked knuckles and horses sold by private arrangement, a man doing penance for something that was not his fault, and the specific weight of an injustice borne in silence. She did not sleep for some time. When she did, she slept deeply. The storm broke at 6 in the morning, an hour before sunrise, and by 8 the sky was clear and washed, and the park smelled of cut grass and wet earth. Mira was in the corridor outside the estate office at 5 minutes to 8, with her notebook in her apron, and the bundle of comparative letters in her hands, and the postmistress's dates in her memory. She did not have to wait long. Dorian Hale came at 8 precisely. He was dressed for travel, a hat, a coat, the efficiency of a man who means to be elsewhere before noon, and he walked into the estate office without looking at the corridor behind him. That was his first mistake. The second was pulling back the false panel in the east wall, the one behind the hunt scene painting, the one she had not known about until the Dowager Duchess described it in the kind of detail that suggested it had been discovered rather than told to her. And removing a thin packet of documents, he turned and found Mira standing in the doorway. He was still for a moment. Then the smile came, patient and preloaded. "Miss Ashworth, you are an early riser. I am." She did not move. "Those are the original trust transfer orders." The smile held. "Estate documents. I am trustee of record, as you know." The trust transfer orders, she repeated, dated 4 years ago, bearing your countersignature and a second signature that belongs to the late Duke's solicitor, who died 8 months after they were executed. £42,000 redirected through 3 intermediary accounts, of which the terminal one is registered in your name in Bristol. She paused. The banking house in Bristol. The same city that appears on the forged letter you produced yesterday. Behind her, the corridor was no longer empty. Edmund had been there since 7, she knew. Though she had not looked, she had heard him, the particular weight of his step 2 yards behind her, and slightly to the left, where the corridor joined the main hall. Now he came in. And behind him, the Dowager Duchess's steward, a man of 60 with the face of a parish judge, and the county magistrate, who had been called from the village at first light, and old Mrs. Caro from the neighboring estate, who served on the property trust committee, and whose presence, Mira understood with abrupt clarity, was the neutral instrument Edmund had been assembling. And in the doorway behind all of them, leaning on her stick with the serene composure of a woman who has been orchestrating things since before most people present were born, the Dowager Duchess herself. Dorian Hale looked at the room. His smile underwent a very small, very final adjustment. "Edmund, please don't." He came to the desk and he placed on it a second packet of documents, this one in an oilskin cover, tied with red tape. "These are the originals, which I removed from the panel 3 days ago and replaced with copies, which you have just taken." Hale looked at the oilskin packet. He looked at the copies in his own hands. Something crossed his face, not fear exactly, but its near neighbor. The look of a man watching a structure he built carefully and lived in for years begin, very quietly, to come apart. "Copies," Mira said, and she put her notebook on the desk and opened it to the page of figures that do not match the originals in one specific respect, which I will demonstrate. She took the letter from her bundle, the estate letter, the wool contract, his handwriting, and she placed it beside the original trust transfer order, and she brought both to the lamp. The capital A and the descender on the Y. The same hand. She looked at the magistrate. "Sir, the postmistress can confirm dates on 6 dispatches from this house over the past year that correspond to the transfers in these documents. I have her written confirmation in my notebook, which I will leave with you." The magistrate came to the desk. He bent over the letters. He looked for a long time. He straightened. "Hale, is there anything you wish to say?" Hale looked at the papers. He looked at Edmund. He looked at the room, the assembled faces, the gray morning light, the wet park through the window, and something happened in his expression that Mira had not expected, and that she watched with the close attention she gave to everything important. A grief, genuine and old, surfacing through the practiced exterior like water through stone. Not calculation. Not performance. An actual grief. The grief of a man who has told himself a story for 4 years about what he deserved and has now run out of story. His father promised me the stewardship before Edmund was born, before everything changed. He set the copied documents on the desk. I don't expect that to matter. It doesn't excuse it, but I believe it. He looked at Hale for a long moment. I will not bring a prosecution. The room shifted. The magistrate looked at Edmund. Your Grace, the funds will be repaid. I have Hale's note for that purpose, drawn and signed 3 days ago, against properties of his own that are not entailed. He glanced at Hale. You will resign the trusteeship and remove yourself from the county. You will not contest this, and I will not pursue it further. A pause. I am doing this because it would destroy your mother's remaining years to see you tried, and she was kind to mine. That is the full extent of my reasoning. Dorian Hale looked at him. He said nothing. After a moment, he nodded once, a small, contained movement that was somehow the most honest gesture Mira had ever seen from him, and he walked out of the room, and the corridor took him, and the house was quiet. The magistrate stayed long enough to take Mira's notebook and confirm his intention to register the comparative samples with the county record. Mrs. Caro said 3 precise sentences about the trust documents, signed her name to the steward's witness statement, and departed with the brisk satisfaction of a woman whose committee has been proven correct about something. The Dowager Duchess looked at her son, and her son looked back, and some transaction passed between them that Mira did not try to read, because some ledgers are not for other eyes. Then Edmund Ashmore looked at Mira. The room was nearly empty. The lamp was still burning, unnecessary now in the morning light. The wet park outside had a bird in it, her blackbird, she thought, though she could not have said why she had started thinking of it as hers, and it was singing with the restored confidence of a creature the storm had not touched for long. "Miss Ashworth." "I know," she said, because she thought she probably did. "The thing you could not tell me." He came to stand at the desk, not opposite her but beside her, the way he had stood when they looked at the letters together, and he said, "I have been trying to gather the evidence you helped me gather. For the past 2 years. Alone," he looked at his hands. "In the process, I allowed the rumor of gambling debts to stand uncorrected, because the alternative was to accuse my cousin openly, which I could not do without proof, and to protect my mother from the knowledge that the man she trusted as a son was." He stopped. "I have been living in the reputation as a ruin, because a ruin is below suspicion, and I needed him not to run until I had the original documents." She looked at him. She thought about worked knuckles, horses sold by private arrangement, a man who came home with nothing showing on his face. "You sold your horses, 3 of them, yes, to keep the household running while you waited." "Yes," she looked at the window. The light was doing what it did after a storm, very clean, very honest, with no softening. "You should have told me earlier. I found the false entries 6 weeks before you came home." "I know. My mother wrote to me." A pause. "I was afraid of what you would do with the information. I would have done what I did do. I know that now." He was quiet for a moment. "I have nothing to offer you." And his voice had changed register for the first time she could recall, not the working voice, the calculating voice, but something underneath it, stripped and plain. "That is not modesty. It is the actual account. The estate is solvent now, marginally, once Hale's note is called. The house will stand. But there is no fortune, no society position worth the name, no." He stopped. "I have nothing left to offer a bride." She looked at him. Something in her chest was doing what she had not given it permission to do, which was to be entirely unconcerned with the question of fortunes and positions. She heard, under his words, the cost of saying them aloud, a man who has lived for 2 years in the story of his own ruin, until the story has started to become the truth he believes. "You have yourself. I accept." The silence lasted long enough for the blackbird to complete a phrase. "That is not," he began. "Don't tell me what it is." She picked up her notebook from the desk. She smoothed the cover, corner to corner, a habit so old she did not notice she was doing it. "You asked me to trust you for 2 days. I am asking you to believe me for approximately the same duration, at the end of which I expect you will have arrived at a more accurate accounting." She looked at him, directly, for perhaps the first time since he had come home, looked at him the way she looked at the figures that did not add correctly, with the specific attention she reserved for things that mattered. "Marry me because you wish it. It is the only reason I will take." He looked at her for a long time, the working expression, the attending expression, and underneath it something that had not been there before, or perhaps had been there and had simply not been readable in the available light. "I have wished it since you told me the accounts did not add correctly. I want to be precise about that." "Good. Precision matters." The county assembly convened on the appointed day and found the Corot estate accounts in sufficient order to decline the creditor's motion. The county had a great deal to say about this. The county also had a great deal to say about Dorian Hale's abrupt departure for the north, about the appointment of a new trustee, and about the particular expression on Miss Ashworth's face when the Duke of Caro handed her into the assembly room and did not let go of her hand coming out. The county said everything it needed to say and then moved on to the next thing, as counties do. The wedding was in October, in the small church at the edge of the park, with the oak trees at their most extravagant and the morning cold enough that breath showed. The Dowager Duchess wept at the altar with the open satisfaction of a woman who has been proven right about something she cared about and sees no reason to conceal it. The steward, whose name was Trent, and who had served the house for 31 years, and had been the one to slip the Dowager Duchess the detail about the false panel, which she had slipped to Mira, which had closed the net, stood in the back of the church and was quiet for approximately 6 minutes before his own eyes began to trouble him. He was afterward absolutely certain he had a cough. Dorian Hale was reported to be in Scotland, where he had a small property, and a sister who was, by all accounts, glad of the company. He wrote one letter to Edmund, short and precise, acknowledging the debt and its repayment schedule. Edmund wrote back one line. He did not show it to Mira, and she did not ask. His mother moved into the east wing and could be heard, in the evenings, laughing at something Mira had said. Mira's great-aunt, who was 91 and impervious to sentiment of every variety, sent a card expressing the view that Mira had made a sensible arrangement, and she hoped the linens were good. They were. The redeemable Mrs. Caro of the neighboring estate, who had been cold to Mira in the manner of a woman protecting a fixed quantity of local consequence, came to call in November with a subscription list for the village school, and the manner of a person who has privately amended an opinion and finds the amendment sits well on her. She stayed for 2 hours. She was invited back. Trent, the steward, received a significant adjustment to his annual arrangement and was observed, on a morning in late November, teaching one of the undergardeners to read an estate survey map. He was patient about it. This surprised no one who had been paying attention. Almost a year later, on an afternoon in late August, the heat pressing on the park like a flat hand and the library windows open to a garden that smelled of ripeness and cut grass, Mira Ashmore, now, though she still thought in her own name in the way of women who have carried their names long enough to trust them, was at the library desk with a ledger open before her when she heard the carriage on the drive, not the crack of a wheel against the gatepost this time. A clean arrival. She did not look up immediately. She finished the figure she was entering, set down her pen, and listened to the familiar step crossing the hall, the familiar economy of movement, the door. The Bristol matter is settled. He set his hat on the corner of the desk, which was, she had concluded, his way of announcing that he was staying. Hale's solicitor confirms the final transfer. Good, she looked up. He was dusty from the road, and there was, she noted with the warmth she had stopped trying to govern, a smear of something on his right cuff that might be lamp black or might be engine grease, since he had become interested in the mill machinery over the winter and had taken to inspecting it personally. You were going to tell me something last October, and then the solicitor arrived, and you didn't. She had been waiting for him to remember this. I was going to tell you that I had known from the third day that you were not what you seemed. And that knowing it, watching you carry it, without asking anyone to carry it with you, was the thing that... She stopped. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the window. You said once that you had wished it since I told you the accounts did not add. I had wished it since I saw the lamp black on your cuff and understood what it meant. That is the record. I wanted it set down accurately. He came to the desk. He stood beside her, as he always did, and he looked at the open ledger and then at her, and she saw what she had first seen in the corridor outside the estate office, and what she saw now every time he looked at her when he thought she was not noticing, the attending expression, and under it, not hidden, simply very quiet. Everything else. You have yourself. I still accept. He picked up her hand and held it in both of his, the working hands, the honest hands, and outside the window the blackbird was still at its business, 3 notes and one long one, bright and senseless and carrying. If this story sat with you the way it sat with me, the kind that stays in the chest a little after it ends, like warmth from a fire you've left, then come back and keep the candle company a while longer. There is always a chair here and a kettle on, and more stories where this one came from. I would love to know, when did you first believe in her? Was it the accounts that didn't add, the lamp black on his cuff, or the morning she walked into that corridor and stayed? Leave it below. I read every one. And if you'd like to keep your place by this hearth, a gentle subscription makes sure the next story finds its way to you. Until then, sleep well and be generous with the ones who have been keeping the accounts quietly all along.